good to see you again. And it's good to see many of you again as well. Some of you I don't know as well as others. Some of you, I suppose, I know a little too well. I did a lot of my seminary work with Jim Strauss, and Jewel is here tonight, and thrilled to see her. Jim was a very special man to me and to so many other people as well, and I'm more than proud to carry on part of the legacy that he has left the kingdom of God and Lincoln Christian and this church even. So I'm very glad to be with you tonight. You know, I consider this as a seniors group. Right. I think the letter that Bob sent me, it said something like, I forget the term, but something about older folks group, you know, and you know, I was a senior when I was 17. And I was a senior again when I was about 22, a college senior, and I've graduated 4 times from colleges, so I guess I was a senior all those times as well. But this last year, several years ago when I started getting all the mailings from ARP and everything else, that I became a senior more formally, and then this last year I became a true senior because Medicare and I became friends. Well, I say that as a segue to how I'd like to begin tonight. Some of you might remember that some years ago when David Letterman was the host of his evening show, he'd have a top 10 list. So I thought about this top 10 list. Top 10 differences if the Bible had been written by senior saints. So I consider you all senior saints. So we're gonna go through the top 10 list. So let's see number 10. The Lord's Supper would have served ensure. Here's a 9th difference. The 10 Commandments would have had a large print edition. Number 8, walking that extra mile would be described as a 3 days journey. Number 7, God knows the number of hairs on your head would not be such a big deal. Number 6 difference, the Passover would have included more fruits and vegetables. A number 5 difference, had it been written by senior saints, the widow's mite would be the equivalent of a Social Security check. I don't mean to get too personal here tonight. A number 4 difference, Jesus would have healed more deaf people. Number 3 difference, before his healing, the lame man would have at least been provided a wheelchair. And the number 2 difference, the 5th commandment would have read, honor your grandfather and your grandmother. And a number 1 difference, if the Bible had been written by senior saints, the reason why Moses and the Israelites walked into the desert for 40 years, so their children and grandchildren could live in style. Well, you make the connections as you see appropriate. I want to share with you tonight on this theme of dealing with doubt while making disciples. Now, I trust that all of you are involved in some way, shape, or form in making disciples. It might not be going door to door and doing that or leading in a particular group to do that, but this event right here is an occasion in which you're making disciples. We're becoming more and more followers of Christ. But increasingly, we live in a world of questions. Questions are all over the place. In fact, the questions become so serious and severe that more and more people are wrestling with very deep-seated doubt. And it's not just to be restricted to those somewhere else. Questions and doubts arise quite naturally everywhere, including within our churches. And if you're not aware, I will divulge this new revelation to you that your church has its share of young people and perhaps even older folks who have a substantial number of deep questions, even doubts about some aspects of the Christian faith. Here's an example of one influence in our culture. His name is Lawrence Krauss. He's an atheist and very proud of it. He's also a physicist, a cosmologist. And he went on tour with another atheist. The tour was called The Unbelievers. When he was interviewed in a magazine, this is one thing that he said during the interview. He said, "Change is always one generation away." So if we can plant the seeds of doubt in our children, religion will go away in a generation. Now that's one of the influences. The person with whom he went on that tour is arguably the most well-known atheist in the world. His name is Richard Dawkins. He has taught for many years at Oxford University and has written some high-level scientific work in the area of biology. But he's also written a considerable amount of popular material. One of his widely read books simply called The God Delusion. The title of the book is quite indicative of the premise and the thesis of that source. If Richard Dawkins were to walk into this room this very minute, he would likely come up to the front and point his finger at each one of you and say, "You are fools. You are believing an illusion. God is a delusion." Here's the way Richard Dawkins put it in a different location. He said, "When one person suffers from a delusion, it is called insanity. When many people suffer from a delusion, it is called religion." Now, we might look at that and not be that greatly affected by it because we probably ourselves, at least many of you, don't read Richard Dawkins very often. But I guarantee you that there are literally millions of people who are reading folks like Richard Dawkins, and if they aren't reading Richard Dawkins, they're having access to online resources and videos where his ideas and those like his are being distributed not only outside the church, but inside the church as well to many of our young people. We live in a different world, don't we? And I would actually agree with Richard Dawkins in many respects. There are some aspects to religion that do seem absurd. There's a lot of religious motivated action that gives us the kind of violence that we witness literally every day in our world. Now, most of you, I would guess, most all of you, are committed to Scripture. This is an animation representing Scripture. I hope that you are all firmly committed to that. And I'm going to pop up some big words for you, some of which will mean absolutely nothing to you. Words like secular humanism, existentialism, and postmodernism, neo-paganism. You see Islam up there as an example. Now, my purpose tonight is not to give you a description of each one of those, but I would want to emphasize this point. Each one of these terms represents a perspective and a way of life that literally has millions of advocates. And these are some of the influences and the attractions for people not only outside the church, but for folks inside the church, especially our young people. It's a confused mess. David Barrett in the World Christian Encyclopedia identifies 10,000 distinct religions. And even when you focus on Christianity, he identifies over 33,000 Christian denominations. Now, if you were not already involved in church life and probably have been a Christian for much of your life, if you were on the outside of Christianity and on the outside of religion, you didn't know anything about it, can you imagine how confusing it would be if you wanted to be interested in it? To find out that it's a confused mess? Even when you think about the Christian faith, you've got these major traditions even, and they have different emphases on what Christianity is all about. It's no wonder that our culture is filled with people who have some big, big questions. What I want to do, first of all, is to share with you some more specifics about characteristics in our culture. Maybe you've heard some of these observations before. You may not be aware that this, bringing it up on screen just now, is the fastest growing demographic group in America. Now, I don't mean, people who dress like this. This is a group that sociologists and demographers have referred to as the nuns. And the reason why they're called the nuns is because if they were asked, what religion are you affiliated with, they'd say none. It's not that they're Lutheran or Presbyterian or Catholic. It's not even that they're Buddhist or Muslim or Hindu. They're not nothing. Well, that's bad grammar, but at least I knew it was bad grammar. Well, one thing that should alarm you, because one of my requests of you tonight is a prayer request. Realistically, I'm really not expecting for you to remember much of what I do tonight, other than this guy with a beard showed up and he talked for a while. But I hope what I share with you will prompt you to be praying for some things that I will expose for you this evening. And one of the things has to do with how rapidly this group of people who are not affiliated with any religion, how rapidly that group is growing. You can see some of the statistics here. 1990 all the way up to 2014, that group of totally unaffiliated with any religion now stands at about 1/4 of the American populace. To put some numbers to that from 2007 to 2014, that consists of 19 million increase of those who were in that particular category. And when we focus upon younger folks, the so-called millennials, have you heard that term? Now, it keeps moving around a little bit because millennials, kind of used to refer to those about age 18 to 30, but for some reason they keep moving along, So you got younger millennials and older millennials. But I want you to notice how the nuns among those younger age group. In 1990, it was just 11%. In 2012, that figure rose to 32%. And the most recent figure among older millennials is over 1/3. And among younger millennials, the percent of younger millennials who are not affiliated with any religion is at 36%. Now, this is one prayer request for you. God, help us do something. Help us do something that will somehow stem the tide. These nuns come, many of them, from religious homes. In fact, almost 3/4 of the nuns come out of religious homes of some sort. About 2/3 of them can be considered as deconverted. That is, they were at one time committed to their religious heritage, and they have intentionally and consciously, in a sense, rebelled against it and become a nun. One of the studies indicated that when these deconverts were asked why they became deconverts, the most frequently cited reason that they gave was this: they shared their burgeoning doubts with a Christian friend or family member only to receive trite, unhelpful answers. That's another prayer request. When young people, when older folks in the church are asking questions, pray that they will receive something more and something better than trite and unhelpful answers. Now, church teens, those are teens that have attended church on average at least 2 times a month in their high school years. A lot of them are having a good time. The Barna Research Group indicates that nearly 90% or more of churched young people say they are having a fun experience. They know about the Bible characters. They are learning about the Bible stories, and yet the Barna Research indicates that only 9% of them have what we can call a biblical worldview. One of the most disturbing statistics that we can come across is the statistic that talks about those who were raised in Christian heritage who have in their 20s wandered away from their church involvement. The lowest figure in most studies is this: 59%, right at 60%. Now, in case you're not really good at math, that's about 6 out of 10. Some studies put the figure at 70%. The Southern Baptist Convention did a study several years ago among their own young people who were raised in Southern Baptist churches, and the figure they came across was 88% of them were wandering away from church involvement, many of them wandering away from their faith during their college years. Now, a lot of times what we need to do is to look at the problem. And I think we've seen a problem. So, do you feel discouraged enough yet? If I were to stop right now, we'd probably go home and be in depression for the next 3 weeks. So my question is, how should we respond to this problem? So I want to offer you some suggestions for how we might respond, and each one of these would give you a prayer request. Something that you could write down and keep close to your bedside or in your kitchen, wherever you do your devotionals, and make this a part of your prayer purpose. One strategy that I think we need to push toward, especially in the church, is that we need to refocus the what of what we do. Now, in this connection, I find it especially interesting to compare the questions that are raised, first of all, in Matthew chapter 16. If I were to say to you, where can we find the good confession? Many of you would say, Matthew 16. And what is the good confession? Jesus asked his disciples, who do men say that I am? And they responded and said, well, some say you're this, some say you're that. But then Peter speaks up and he says, but I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. Now, in that respect, then, the question is essentially the question, who am I? And it calls for an expression of belief about who Jesus is. It is an expression that we believe such and such. And please don't misunderstand me. I want to say that is the core in many respects of our Christian faith. Unfortunately, too many of our church folks and our church young people somehow have gotten the impression that that's pretty much the extent of their faith and what God really expects of them. As long as they can say, well, I believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God. Check off that box. What more is there? I find it especially insightful to contrast the question that is asked in Matthew 16 with the one that is posed in John chapter 21. After Jesus' crucifixion, after his resurrection, and now Jesus has this engagement with the Apostle Peter once again. But now the question has changed, hasn't it? Now the question is not, who am I? But do you love me? And what I would suggest to you is that everything we do in the church, in every event, especially as we're dealing with young people, is that we have a different focus. The focus is not to get them to say, I believe that. The focus is to lead them to love God. In Mark chapter 12, in verse 30, we find one instance in which the greatest commandment is presented in Scripture. And that is that we are to love the Lord our God with all of our heart, soul, mind, and strength. So one thing that we need to do to try to make a difference is to refocus the what. It's not just believing that, but it is learning to love God. Here's another strategy. It's what I refer to as just stress the why. Now, if loving God is really our ultimate motivation, then that should be our primary objective. And I talked about that in that passage in Mark chapter 12 and verse 30. But there's another passage that represents the why. Some of you could quote that passage even. 1 Peter chapter 3 and verse 15. It's the Apostle Peter again, isn't it? But there Peter says that we should always be prepared to give an answer for the hope that we have. In other words, Peter is admonishing every single one of us to have the desire and the capability to explain to somebody else why we believe what we believe. Now, unfortunately, there are too many folks in our church, and I don't mean just this one, but in Christian churches around the world, too many people in our churches who have not seen the vital importance of being able to explain why they believe what they believe. It's no wonder then why so many of our church young people are wandering away from their faith, because they really have not been instilled within them the foundational reasons why they should believe it. Here's that passage. Always be prepared to give an answer for the hope that you've got. And every single one of us, don't we have hope tonight? The good news is it's not just a blind hope. It's a hope that is well-founded and well-grounded. Here's a third response. Change the how we go about presenting something. And it's in this connection now that I make specific reference to this worldview term that Bob used in the introduction. I think that this concept, I call it a worldview tool, is a way that we can present the message of God in our culture today that will be more effective not only in the church but also outside the church. And I like to begin this worldview concept by simply thinking about who it is that each one of us is. Who are you? Well, here are some things that you are. You are a person, believe it or not, who has a mind. You can believe things, but you're more than just a mind, aren't you? You're a person who has deep-seated emotions. You have attitudes. You have a conscience. You're also a physical being. You communicate, and you have a physical body that acts, and you're also someone who has a volitional self, someone who wills. Now, what I want to pose to you is that this worldview tool is one that I think should begin here. It begins in such a way that we begin to see that who you are is more than just what you say you believe. It's also how you behave. It's really what you want to do at your deepest level, your will. And we get down closer and closer to the very core of all of those components. And whatever is at that core, that is what I think of as one's worldview. So if I were to ask you tonight, do you have a Christian worldview? The temptation for many Christians would be to say, well, of course I have a Christian worldview. I believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God. You see, you would tend to put most of your belief up here in the mind category. And it should be there, but it's more than that. It should permeate all of who you are at the very core of who you are. And so I like to think about this worldview tool as not just a set of beliefs, but as a way of life that is characterized by our deepest held values and beliefs. And when we focus upon a Christian worldview it's a way of life with basic beliefs, priority values, and preferred behavior that are consciously directed by a love for God and His Word for us. Now, the big picture here is this. A Christian worldview is more than just what you believe. A Christian worldview should affect everything you are throughout your whole life. And this is the point that I think we are failing too much in with our churched young people. We are leaving the impression that they're okay if they just believe the right thing rather than truly loving God with all they are. Now the picture gets considerably more complex because this Christian worldview begins with personal integrity where we're consistent. What we say we believe, we do. You know what hypocrisy is? You don't like that? It's when you're saying you believe something, but you do something else. If you have integrity, it means that you are living consistently among those various areas. And then what you do in the area of your personal involvement. These say things like the music that you listen to, what you do at work or your education, or how you use language yourself. It also involves our relationships with other people. Now, I'm not revealing, a lot of stuff to you folks. You understand that the Bible actually says a lot about how we are supposed to interact with church leaders and with mothers and fathers and children. That's a part of what it means not just to have a Christian worldview, but to live a Christian worldview. And then for those that are really into academics and college life, having a Christian worldview should affect how we look at biology and the various sciences. That's a part of it as well. Having a Christian worldview should also affect how we interact with our culture around us. Are we really behaving in a way to minister to those in need? That's a part of what a Christian worldview is all about. And then the outermost circle that I'm depicting here is what I call apologetic interaction. That's where you're engaging those who have a different worldview or a different way of life, and you're giving a reason for why you have the hope you have to try to persuade them of the good news of God. Now, to bring all of these back up, you can see how complex and how much of a task we've got. I could just say, now all you got to do is just do that. Now, don't get the misunderstanding. Your salvation does not depend upon how well you do the works that God has called us to here. So don't make that inference from what I'm saying. But what I am saying is that God is challenging us to live a life of consistency and a life that is effective in how we display the message of God in the culture in which we live. So that's a part of what it really means, I think, to live a Christian worldview. And the real motivation for it all, of course, is this. Why should we do all that? We can't be given any greater motivation than simply to follow the one who gave his life for us. And I know all of you have this sense of genuine privilege that you are able to live your life in gratitude for what God has and continues to do for you. Let me touch on one more strategy, how we might respond to this is what I refer to as modify the mood. Modify the mood. I mentioned to you earlier that our culture, even in the church, especially among many of our young people, is dealing with doubt. And here is my main message when it comes to changing the mood. I think we need to communicate to our young people that it's okay to have some doubts. It's okay to have tough questions. This is one of the fundamental breakdowns, it seems to me, in the mood of the church. David Kinnaman, who's head of one of the major research organizations, the Barna Research Group, did some research on those who have a Christian background, and he discovered that almost 40% of them say that at some point they had significant doubts about their faith. When they were asked about whether they actually felt ever like rejecting their parents' faith, 32% of them said at some point they felt like rejecting their parents' faith. And when they were asked whether the church provided an open environment for them to ask their tough questions, 36% of them said that the church does not provide an ample opportunity or environment for them to ask their questions. Now, as we begin to piece some of this together, here is the next step. If our young people in the church do not feel comfortable in the context of the church to express their questions and even to express their doubts will go unexpressed, but they will not disappear. David Kinnaman, in a very insightful study called You Lost Me, it's a title of a book that expresses the idea, hey, church folk, you once had me, but you lost me. David Kinnaman makes this point so powerfully. He says, I believe that unexpressed doubt is one of the most powerful destroyers of faith. Now, how can we change the environment? Well, one way that we can and should do it, I think, is to try to drive home the point however we can. It might be with grandchildren. It might mean just meeting up with some other folks in church during a Sunday school class or at another gathering and doing what you can to communicate this point. It's okay. It's okay to have questions. In fact, I would contend that doubt can be a very good thing. In some way, we should encourage it. One thing that I am extremely grateful for, and that is that every single follower of Jesus, even his closest followers, were all doubters. Now, we only think of Thomas. How would you like to be known 2,000 years from now being the doubter? It's not exactly a great legacy, is it? But facts be told, Thomas was not the only doubter. Every single one of them had their doubts. John the Baptist even had major doubts. At one point he's saying, "Behold the Son of God, the Lamb of God that takes away the sin of the world." And then a little bit later, John is in prison. And he sends a team of people to Jesus to ask this question: "Are you the one, or shall we look for somebody else?" Wow. That's expressing some big-time doubt, isn't it? And so I'm thankful, really, that every single one of the closest followers of Jesus were doubters, because you know what that means? It means that when they did become convinced of the truth of the resurrection of Jesus, their testimony was all that much more powerful. You see, if you approach the doorway of doubt and allow God to work in and through those doubts and tough questions, you can come out on the other side of that doorway with a deeper faith. And we need to communicate that to our church young people. It's okay to doubt. Doubt can be a very good thing. On the other hand, however, doubt can be a dangerous thing. It depends on how we approach it. It's possible for us to have doubts, but actually to have it lead to greater disbelief. Doubt itself, however, seems in some ways neutral. It can be a good thing. It can also be a dangerous thing. But we need to provide a more open, welcoming atmosphere within the church for people to express their doubts and without the fear of intimidation. And that brings me to this project. Bob mentioned a grant program. He said that it was a grant program that received slightly over $1 million. That's the Worldview Eyes program that I have directed now for over 15 years. But the most recent program that I'm involved with is this project called Room for Doubt. It's a program that was designed especially for churches. And as the name suggests, it's a program to try to change the mood in churches, to let them understand that it's okay to have tough questions and even to express doubts, and to give an open atmosphere for that to occur. Now, I don't know if you're all into, going online. I mean, some years ago, if somebody said, "You ought to go online," they'd probably be thinking of a clothesline. Hang myself on the clothesline. What does that mean? So I don't know if you're into that online stuff. But this Room for Doubt program, we do have a very important presence online, on internet. And this program is designed to provide an environment to encourage questions, to address doubts, and inevitably to strengthen faith. Now, that program has been fortunate to receive about $750,000, and that's a separate grant program, Bob. It's relatively new, just about 3 years old now. This is a picture of the web page. Remember this passage in Mark 9, "I do believe, help my unbelief." So we want to provide an atmosphere for this. I invite you, if you do that online thing other than the clothesline, go to roomfordoubt.com. And if you're not that interested in it, perhaps you've got some family members or friends, other people that you have acquaintance with, who would greatly value and be helped by this website. It provides an opportunity for people to express questions. There's a spot on there where they can just submit questions, and then we respond to those questions and post them on the website. It's a place for them to express those doubts. This is a picture of our Facebook page. So if you're into Facebook, it's possible to go to our Facebook page and like us or follow us, however that terminology is done. This program is involved in giving a number of workshops and seminars in various places. I and others do a number of workshops for conventions and conferences and for churches. And sometimes we even go to senior saints meetings, I understand. And one of the benefits of that is you get good food. Plus you get to meet and greet wonderful people. We're engaged in doing some writing, some publication in periodicals, and working on some books. We have special events on the campus at Lincoln Christian University. In fact, much of what we do now is done through the lectureship that is held every October in the name of Jim Strauss, the James D. Strauss Lectureship. And much of what we're doing in the last several years is done through that particular event. But here's the event that I would specifically ask for your prayers in. It's a new message and curriculum series for churches that is a 6-week series. And we are just now able to offer these materials, and we are hoping and praying and planning that there will literally be thousands and thousands of churches around the country and around the world that will do this 6-week series. We have sermons that have been written. We have group discussion guides that have been prepared. This is a discussion guide for adult small group studies. By the way, some of you might even remember that young man who happened to appear on the cover of that discussion group. That's Bob Lowry's son. Now, I didn't know that our marketing department, had that picture or that they were going to use it for this, but that'll make a little connection there. We also have a separate discussion guide for youth, primarily for high school. So the point of this 6-week series is for the entire church to do it at the same time. So sermons are preached on it, and then during the week for classes or for small groups, people are following up and discussing the topics that were listed there. So those topics, let me jump back to that just for a second. Here are those topics talking about the upside of doubt and how we can be sure that God really exists. What about the Bible? What about Jesus as God's Son? Why does God allow tragedy and suffering? And what about the claims of Jesus? Isn't that intolerant for somebody to say that he's the only way? See, these are some of the big questions that people have, not just outside the church, but also in the church. So this series is an opportunity for everybody in the church and the community to talk openly about these tough questions. It's also being used in area-wide campaigns. You might be aware that last October or so, over in Decatur, there were 25 churches that did this campaign simultaneously. Not just Christian churches of our vintage, but there were some Lutheran churches and others that were involved in doing this campaign because it's a part of the message of God. In early spring, there'll be a group of 7 churches in the Des Moines, Iowa area. This month, down in the Shelbyville area, there are 5 churches that are now doing that. So we're just getting it going, so to speak, and that's one reason why I'm requesting your faithful prayer life, asking you to help us pray for the effectiveness of this program. It includes messages the adult and youth study guide. We had some heavy hitters, some people who are experienced in this field working with us. Mark Middleberg has published an awful lot in the area of evangelism and Christian apologetics. Gary Poole, perhaps you've heard of the name Lee Strobel, who has published very widely in the area of Christian apologetics. Lee Strobel was once an atheist who was a reporter for the Chicago Tribune. He became a Christian through his wife and now is a widely published gentleman. Well, these three guys are all long-time friends with each other. They served together at Willow Creek Community Church up in the Chicago area. And they're the ones who were primarily responsible for helping us pull together the materials. And they, in conjunction with me and others at Lincoln Christian University, are the ones who have come up with these materials for that 6-week series for Room for Doubt. So this is what I have presented to you. In order to respond, I'm asking for your prayer to help us refocus the what. Not just talking about believing that Jesus is the Son of God, but loving him. I've talked to you about stressing the why. We need to give some answers, especially to our young people, for why they should have the hope that they have as a Christian. I've also talked to you about the importance of changing the how we go about it. And that's the use of this worldview tool that reminds us that living a Christian life is more than just believing the right thing. It's involving everything in your personal life and every aspect of your life in which you live. And then that last point, to modify the mood, where we try to communicate as best we can. It's okay to have tough questions. It's okay even to express doubt. And I plead for your faithful prayer life. And it has been my joy to come and share with you tonight.